Hi guys, how are you? Dr. Pam, academic coaching for world changers. I know it's been like a half a minute. I'm not sure when you're watching this video, but if you're watching my shorts, you're like, dang, she ain't put one out in at least 6 weeks. And you're right. Sorry. Life got in the way. Those kids, which I live for, grew up. They all have their own lives. So Dr. Pam had to make some changes. I know, imagine that. So I did downsize a little bit. Kids are all on their own. This is June of 2022. If you watch my videos kind of in sequence, you'll have an idea of kind of who I am and where we're at. But this is one of my shorts. What I have found is, in addition to me having an attention span about this long, it's kind of most of my clients. And it's not an age thing. At the recording time of this recording, I'm 57. Still have a short attention span. And of course, my 20 and 30 somethings also have that kind of extension. Same type of extent. Wow. The braces, guys. Sorry. Same type of attention span. So I just want to touch a little bit tonight on Carl Rogers. So the goal of these videos are to be about 15 to 20 minutes and to really be able to watch them over and over and over again. So if you've tutored with us or you heard anything about us, what we do recommend is about 90 days, no matter what test you're taking, and we do tutor to all the mental health tests, 90 days. 90 days, 6 days a week, I know, 3 hours a day. The 3 hours a day is an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, and an hour at night. You're like, what? We don't have time for that. So what that means, though, is very small. So if you're studying Carl Rogers, then that's all you'll study for 6 days. You'll know everything about Carl Rogers. You will know what's going to come out of my mouth next. And the goal is for you to really be able to hear my voice while you're taking the test. I can't be with you. If I could be in your pocket, I would, but I can't. But I want to be in your head. All these tests, whether you're looking at the LMFT or the drug and alcohol test, the social work, any of the social work tests, right? The LPC, the 5-letter test, the NCH, MCE, the process is really all the same. It's a matter of learning content and then learning how to apply it to the questions. So those are two separate things, and this video is really just about content. This is Carl Rogers. So Carl Rogers, right? Let me move my picture a little bit. Carl Rogers, 1902 to 1987. So Carl Rogers really came about right after the Freudian and the Neo-Freudians. So Freud was a psychoanalytic, right? He believed everything was the unconscious, and the goal was to bring the things from the unconscious to the conscious. Freud and all of the Neo-Freudians, the client was the dumb woman. And I say that jokingly. Remember, I only teach to the test. But if we look at history at the time, many of the clients were women. In Vienna, Austria, that's where he was working. Men could have the ability at times to really just put their wives in a insane asylum or whatever it was called back then. So Carl Rogers came along directly after that and said, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe the therapist is not the expert. And it really was a very much opposite approach of what Freud believed. Okay. So what he said, he's considered humanistic. So he, Maslow, Virginia Satir, those are people that looked at putting people first. That's what that means in say humanistic. He said that as for people to grow, they need an environment that provides them with genuineness, openness, and self-disclosure acceptance. So how he defined that genuineness is if what is coming out of my mouth matches my body. That is considered congruence. So those of you that are married and you ask your spouse, are you mad at me? And they say, no, not at all. I'm just saying that don't match, right? So what you're looking for a client to believe that you're genuine, what is coming out of my mouth needs to match my body. And I know all of us in this field have definitely heard some stories that would make our skin crawl, right? That's why we're in this field. But what we're looking for is unconditional positive regard, that no matter what the client shares with me, then I'm going to be congruent, right? I'm going to say, and I'll tell my new students, if I'm stuck, just say thanks for sharing, right? Don't look at them with that deer in the headlights look. So what he said, again, genuineness has to do with being open, right? What's coming out of my mouth matches my body. That's congruency. Empathy, the client is being listened to. Okay. So what he believed is the client was the expert in their own life. So what he was there was to help the person, support the person based on those theories so they could be the very best that they could be. And so if you'll see that, Carl Rogers was that every person could achieve their goals, wishes, and desires to learn when, or rather if they did so. Self-actualization, that's Maslow, right? The Maslow hierarchy of needs, that's where that belongs. And I think I mentioned earlier, right, that Maslow was definitely a humanist. Maslow, when he first came along, his theory was like, what? So the population that he was working with at the time, it didn't really occur to anyone. It wasn't something that we should look at of making sure that the client's needs came first. Okay. So if you stick around with me, you'll find we'll talk about Maslow in our career section too, right? Because Rowe was a follower of Maslow. Yes, she had an unconscious belief system, like many of our other psychoanalytic. However, her theory is based on Maslow. Humanitarian, putting people first. Physiological, remember when you see that? PHSI, physiological means physical. The PHSI gives you a clue that it's not necessarily always my psychological needs, but my physiological needs, what my body needs to survive. So what he said is our goal is to help clients become self-actualized, right? That's being the very best that they can be. Okay. Again, words that belong to Carl Rogers. And you're reading test questions. You really have to have a very good concept of who he is, as well as what a question would look like in the test. Okay. So then what he said and what his goal was is that people could become fully functioning people. As the clinician, my job really was just to support them, to help them figure it out themselves. And you'll remember that Carl Rogers did not believe in diagnosing. He said if we diagnose, then we pathologicalize, right? Your pathology, that's your diagnosis. We make a out of the current problem that we're diagnosing. He said, that's not true. So if we look at Carl Rogers again, he said that every person has to achieve their own goals. They set the goals, not me. Okay, that means a person is in touch with the here and now. Don't freak out because this is not gestalt. This is just here and now. And his or her subjective, my opinion, how I see life, my experiences and feelings are continually growing and changing. Okay? In many ways, Rogers regarded the fully functioned person as an idea, and that people do not ultimately achieve. So like anything, right, when we get to that top level, the self-actualization Maslow as well, as Carl Rogers said, many people just don't get there. Okay, so how would you identify a fully functioning person? They're open to experience. Existentialism. So if you think of existentialism, many times we're thinking of, right, Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, Yalom was also an existentialism. One of the best ways, and I'll do a different video talking about existentialism, is what do I exist? Why do I exist? What is my purpose? The world's got to be bigger than me. Trust feelings, creativity, 5, and a fulfilled life. Okay? So again, those are what he wanted for his client. And if you're working from that Carl Rogers approach, so you might see Rogerian, client-centered, person-centered. And what that means is the client is the expert in their life. And the goal for me is to support them. And if I support them, then they can really figure it out by themselves. Okay, I like this a lot. So in 51, again, I always think it's important to remember the time frame when you're studying the test. Don't take this material and look at as you look at it now, because this is what happened in the 50s, especially when we're looking at the theorists, whether it's the career people or the human behavior people. Remember to take in consideration the time frame. It doesn't mean we don't do it now, but when you're looking at those test questions and it's a reading test, you want to wear your blinders, only what's in the test, and remember, right, what time frame it was written in. So he talked about children having two basic needs, which were positive regard from people and self-worth. Okay, and that's where that theory came from. So what he said is, as clinicians, if we provide unconditional positive regard, which he defined is where parents, significant others fail, right? The humanist theorists, they're going to accept and love the person for where he is. So what I always think about, so in this profession, when we have a client who comes to us and they share with us, they've done something really not okay with society, we are still able to separate the person from the issue, especially our drug addicts, things like that. Okay. So then, positive regard, congruence. Congruence is the term that he used. So what he wanted is, as I mentioned before, that's where that genuineness came from. So congruence is when it matches. In addition to the clinician being congruent, the client needed to be congruent. Okay? So what that meant for the client is, see how it overlaps? The self-image is similar to the ideal self. There's a lot of overlap, and the person can self-actualize. Self-actualization, right? Top of Maslow's. Incongruent is when they don't match. So what he said again is, if we have a positive if we have a genuineness as a clinician, right? If we're genuine, if we have unconditional positive regard, and we are empathetic, that the client can figure it out all by themselves. I always think it's kind of ironic, and I did a little research on it, and I haven't always been able to find the tie, but I do think it's a little ironic when we look at Carl Rogers and Mr. Rogers, right? So if you watch my previous videos, I think Mr. Rogers and Carl Rogers may have had some things in common. If you're old enough to remember, and if you're not, I'll share a video with, in this video I'll include some things. So Mr. Rogers, of course I'm going to use Wikipedia because that's always the best source, not for papers, but in general. So if you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was, came about, and pull that down, sorry. Okay. From 1968 to 2001. And remember, that came about the same time as Carl Rogers. In the neighborhood, everything was okay. So at the time, that's where he talked about little boys and little girls and things just being accepted, right? So I just, and when I do research, so it's not necessarily a tie, but I think it's a really easy way to really remember the relationship and the importance of what Mr. Rogers said. So at the time, what Mr. Rogers, right, Fred Rogers wanted in the neighborhood is that kids could come in and talk about things without judgment, okay? And then Carl Rogers was very much the same belief system. So his name was Fred Rogers, right? And okay. So, I over kind of that time frame, right? So Carl Rogers, of course, we know he's our humanitarian. humanistic approach, client-centered approach. All of those words are the things that you'll see that belong to Carl Rogers. Bottom line is his theory is that clients are the experts in their life. He purposely went against the psychoanalytic approach. Now it's called psychodynamic, but then it was psychoanalytic. And the goal was for you to understand that the client is the expert in their life, that everything, the client's right, and I'm there to support them. That's my goal, right, is to support the client by being warm, by being genuine, showing positive
self-regard. Unconditional, right? So unconditional, that's what we wanted, that, we're there for you no matter what you say, what you do, we're there for you. The client could figure it out by himself. The problem with that is when you're looking at test questions is that's not okay for every group, right? There are some groups, especially when we're looking at our pedophiles, our drug and alcohol users. And again, I only teach to the test, so please don't send me email, text, or anything that's saying there's more to this. I will totally agree, but I only teach to the test. The goal of all of these videos is to help you understand the concept and the way that they will look in a question. Okay, so let's look at 32. Rogers indicated that one of the features that distinguished client-centered therapy from other approaches was that it required the therapist to what? Okay, I'm looking for the words, the terminology, the things that belong to Carl Rogers, right? The client is the expert. If I'm there to support them, I'm not going to diagnose them because they're the expert. Carl Rogers also used that word phenomenological view. Let me show you that word. I'll come back to that question. So that if you went to school many years ago, you may not be the word phenomenological really just means understanding it from the client's viewpoint, the phenomenon that they see. We're not going to question what they see. Okay, so there are definitely some areas that this question will be appropriate. This sphere would be appropriate, and there's some times that it would not be. So going back to that question, okay. So Rogers indicated that one of the features that distinguishes client-centered therapy from other approaches was that it requires the therapist to do what? So if you're taking sessions with me, classes with me, some individual tutoring, I'm always going to say, we want to follow the same rules. We're going to understand the question first. It's a reading test, guys. It's just a reading test. So one of the features that makes client-centered different than other approaches, okay? So one, allows a client to determine the focus of the therapy session. B, uses an empathetic passive approach. C, encourages transference on the part of the client. Or D, encourages the client to make connections between present and past behavior. So let's rule out, let's figure out how we answer these questions. So I know my content about Carl Rogers, client's the expert, I'm there to support them, they'll figure it out. So I always say, let's rule out 2. So B, uses an empathetic passive approach. So I know that Carl Rogers was empathetic, right? He really, that was one of the terms he used. But I don't know that passive would be a term he would use. Okay, he did believe that it was supportive to the client, and empathy belongs to many of our theorists. Okay. So I'm gonna hold on to B just for a moment because it has empathy. C, encourages transference on the part of the client. Ooh, that's definitely a Freudian term or a psychoanalytic term. That was not something that Rogers would use. Okay, I got to get rid of that one. D, encourages the client to make connections between the present and the past behaviors. That's not what Carl Rogers said. I think I mentioned earlier he really talked about the here and now, which also belongs to a different theorist. But he didn't really look at your unconscious, your insight, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and take D out. So now I'm taking C and D out. It leaves me down with A and B. And this is where most of us get stuck, right? Oh, God, he uses empathy, and that's one of his words. What do I do? So I'm going back to the question, and I have to have some content based on Carl Rogers, right? What does that mean? So allow the client to determine the focus of therapy, or B, use an empathetic passive approach. And I'm looking for that best of the two. And I think that's where many of my clients get stuck. The correct answer to this one is A. I know, right? Because allows the client to determine the focus of therapy. The client is the expert. It's their life. They're going to drive where it goes, and as a Rogerian, I'm just going to support them. Okay? So remember, there are definitely some questions where Carl Rogers is not the best type of group. So if I've got a group of and I mentioned before, I'll say, pedophiles or drug and alcohol users. And again, I only teach to the test, so please don't read any more to this than there is. It's just about the test. But as a population, one of the things that's most difficult is honesty, right? Denial is part of many of those, is a part of substance abuse. It's a part of the population, right? So then, if you come in and tell me that you have got this desire to keep drinking, this desire to hurt children, I can't support that, right? So Carl Rogers is not the best approach when it comes to many of those questions. And what you'll see on the test is determining whether or not that is the best approach. So he would not be the best approach for many of those. Okay, so this is just a kind of brief snippet about Carl Rogers. He is client-centered. He was the client was the expert in his life. He purposely came around after Freud. And I think the best way to remember him is remembering Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, where everything is okay in that neighborhood. Thank you for sitting with me for this brief one, right? We're trying to do some of these shorts. If you click down below, remember to subscribe to the channel. I promise you I'm back on the game plan, and you'll be getting videos weekly. I hope you find this helpful, and you'll also find our address. So if you're looking for additional tutoring, additional questions, we do offer individual, group, as well as monthly boot camps. Feel free to join us, and if not, just continue to watch all of our free videos. Thanks a lot. Good luck on the test you're taking, and a thumbs up and a subscription is always appreciated. Bye, guys.